My cousin Marcus and I relocated to Oregon a couple years ago. We were each in our early 30s, and we'd talked for many years about living in close contact with nature, specifically alongside the Cascade Mountains. But life is life, and neither of us could ever afford to live in a cabin or something similar independently. So we ended up leasing a plain duplex just outside Eugene. It was not too far from where we were looking to be, just a 15-minute drive to the edge of the mountains, and that was just fine. Having lived there, soon we realized how crowded the nearby camping and hiking trails were. They were always full of people, natives, travelers, college students. In even the off-season, it was hard to catch any quiet time or real alone time. That became annoying quickly. We didn't travel there for exercise or view. We traveled there for peace, room to think, room to breathe. So one night over dinner, Marcus suggested that we take a 3-day backpacking trip deep into the forest, somewhere out of sight, away from the weekend hikers and all the commotion. I agreed. I was in. He swore to plot it out and get us permits. I believed him. He was like a map expert. A week or so afterwards, we loaded up our gear and departed early one Friday morning. The trailhead was well nigh 2 hours away, in a somewhat remote part of the forest. Upon arrival, I noticed only a single other vehicle in the Loda, grimy, old green SUV with dry mud caked on it and a broken taillight. It hadn't been cleaned in years to my eye. Marcus joked that it had probably just survived an off-road apocalypse, but seeing just one other car there gave us hope. Maybe we'd really get some peace this time. Day one was an 8-mile hike. The trail itself was mostly flat and easy to follow. We hiked over some creeks and along some beautiful pine woods. Towards the end of the final miles, the terrain changed. We were climbing a mountainside. It wasn't steep, but it continued. And with our packs, it was quite a haul. Marcus had promised us that the location would be worth it, and he was right. 3/4 of the way up, we reached a flat ledge that ran along the edge of the mountain. That was where we could view the whole valley, line after line of trees, winding rivers, and the horizon curving off to eternity. The sun was rising to go down, casting everything in gold. It was peaceful. Just what we needed. We shed our packs and got out to erect our camp. Marcus pitched the tents while I picked up rocks and sticks to form a fire pit. After the fire was lit, we sat there, warming our hands and talking. Hours flew by before we knew it, presumably a couple of hours. The air began to chill, and the fire cracked quietly as we talked about everything from college memories to how things were different with life away from the city. And then, out of the blue, we both heard it. Footsteps, leading from the direction of the trail. We stood still, listening. The footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming our way. A minute goes by, and a man steps into the edge of the light. He does not have a headlamp, promptly obvious to both of us as out of place. Any backpacker is aware that you don't hike at night on these trails. Closer, we can make out his face. He has a wide, unsettling, too happy smile. He stood there beside the fire, that grin never faltering. Marcus stood and asked if he needed some help. The man addressed him, then me, and then said something. He said he was a park ranger and had been following our trail for some time. As he put it, this section of forest was closed for the season and we shouldn't have been there. But something was amiss. We knew the terrain was open. We had only gotten official permits the day before from a ranger station close to town. Everything was legitimate. And even if something had been manipulated, rangers don't hike mountain trails at night by themselves. It didn't add up. Marcus and I exchanged a look. From his eyes, I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. We started questioning him easy questions. His name, what office he worked out of, whether he had identification. But the guy cut us off quickly. He told us we needed to break camp immediately and come with him back to the trailhead. He'd be taking us out. We did not move. Just stood there, not sure what to do. Something was amiss. He stayed motionless, the light of the fire burning in his eyes, the same strange smile plastered on his face, then turned and walked off into the darkness without a further word. We didn't speak for a while after that. We were too shaken up. We hushed, not wishing to hear the sound of footsteps again. Then, without needing to talk about it, we each threw more dried branches on the fire and kept it smoldering. We weren't sleeping either. Each snap of a twig in the woods got our hearts pounding. At one time, we could have sworn we heard someone outside again, but we never did see anything. By morning, we had hastily packed up. We didn't even get breakfast, only granola bars in transit. We decided to shorten the trip and head back the way we came. That entire hike back, we were looking over our shoulders. Not a word from us until we saw the parking lot. The dusty SUV still hung around. That was the part that crawled under our skin. If it was him that came to our camp, then where did he end up after walking off into the forest? And if not him, then who else was in the forest? And what became of whoever was driving that car? We filed a report with the local police the moment we got back to town, talked to them, gave them the whole story, what he'd said, what he looked like, even the SUV license plate, but nothing came of it. No return call, no follow-up, just like he vanished. There is no doubt in my mind that he was lying when he said he was a ranger. What his true motives were, I really don't even care to know. But I can't help but wonder if he was attempting to take us further into the woods to a place secluded, to a place where no one would hear us. And I seriously question whether or not that other hiker, whoever they were, ever returned. When I was about my mid-20s, I used to camp all the time with some university friends. It was like our escape from everything: classes, stress, city life. But when we all graduated, everyone's schedule became busy. New jobs, new cities, new schedules. We just ended up not being able to plan those trips anymore. After waiting some time, I decided not to allow that to hinder me. I started going out alone. There was this campsite high up on the hills above this lake named Brunswick in North Vermont that we would visit all the time. It wasn't an accessible place, this 2-hour drive and then this long walk, but that's precisely why it was so great. It was quiet. And since most preferred to visit easier spots to reach, I could usually get the site to myself. So I took a weekend in mid-October and packed up my gear and went. I still remembered the trail, and I got there no problem. The air was crisp, trees around me were already full of fall colors, and I could smell dirt and pine as I set up my tent in a clearing we once loved. It brought back fond memories. As the sun started to get lower in the sky, I got all of the equipment out my tent, sleeping bag, cooking equipment, and started getting prepared to relax. Before long, after setting up the tent, a guy arrived. He came up the trail and stuck his head out into the clearing as if he owned the place. He was a typical hiker sort of guy, apparently late 30s, carrying only a small day pack. No tent, no sleeping bag, nothing that would lead you to believe he was going to be spending the night. That was the first thing that seemed odd about it. This was not a scenic lookout or an area that people were going to drive through. It was off enough the trail that you literally only came here if you were camping. So, if he was not going to remain, what was the point of walking all the way there? Anyway, I didn't think much about it then. He was not threatening. Maybe he just wanted peace like me. He remained on the other side of the campground and didn't try to talk. I did my own thing and figured he'd be leaving anyway. By about 6 in the evening, I walked from my tent for a little distance to prepare dinner. I boiled water using my small camp stove and prepared one of those freeze-dried dinners. While waiting, I saw the man depart. He simply picked up his bag and departed in the direction he came. That was also something that caused me to wonder. The sun was beginning to set, and from here the hike out would take a minimum of 2.5 and maybe 3 hours. Most of the trail would be in darkness shortly. It didn't particularly make sense to leave from here unless you were quite certain or didn't have any place else to go. I ruled it out though. I was simply glad to have the place all to myself again. Dinner consumed, I returned to my tent, perched upon a small collapsible stool, and let myself get wrapped up in the environment. The forest was quiet. No animals moving around, no wind, nothing. When all of the light had faded, I took my small lantern and hooked it onto the lip of my tent. I stood outside for a bit, just thinking. The cold was moving in, and I finally came to understand how alone I was out there. It was like it reminded me of all those nights my friends and I spent sitting around a campfire laughing and sharing stories. Tonight, though, I was alone, and since there was no fire, there wasn't much else to do. Eventually, I blew out the lantern, crawled into the tent, and got settled. The silence continued. I drifted off. Sometime later during the night, I awoke. At first, I had no idea why everything was completely dark, and I couldn't hear anything at first. But then slowly I realized I heard the sound of steps, light but distinct, passing by fairly close. I stood there motionless, holding my breath. The steps approached closer and closer, and I could feel my heart pounding faster. I grubbed for my lantern, lit it, and unzipped the tent. 20 feet away from me, in the dim light of the lantern, I could see a man. He was in the same place where that guy from earlier was, and even in the fading light, I could tell it was probably him. Same build, same shape. But he just stood there, didn't budge, didn't say a word. Nobody ought to have been out there in the middle of the night, just standing, doing nothing. I couldn't even tell which direction he was facing. He could have been looking at me the entire time. Or then again, maybe he wasn't. Either way, it was terrifying. I tried to speak to him, shout to ensure if he was okay, but he just didn't respond. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I carefully pulled out my pocket knife from my backpack, which I had placed next to me on the tent floor, and held it in my hand. I didn't open it, just squeezed it in my fist, ready just in case. And then the longest 15 minutes of my existence, I remained there with the lantern faintly lighting up the clearing, staring at this guy standing effectively still. Every so often, he would move ever so little, just enough to confirm he wasn't a statue or a ghost. Then he'd spin around and leave, in the same direction that he had originally headed. And by the way he was walking, I realized that yes, he had been standing in front of me all the while. He had simply stood there, silently staring at me for over 15 minutes. The cold ran down my whole body as I overheard him saying his goodbye in his stride. I did not know what to do. I slept the rest of the night. I slept not. I blinked not for a very long time. My ears stood guard to every sound, my eyes fixed on the trees in case he would come back. But hey, to my knowledge, he never did. Early in the morning, I rapidly packed everything I had and left the camp. The woods were no longer quiet. It was chilly. It was watching. I returned quickly, looking over my shoulder from time to time, although there was no sign that someone was tracking me. I went back to my vehicle, returned home, and that was all. I have not gone camping since then. I still do not know why that man was there. There is no account of that night, however, where his movements weren't very disturbing. Maybe the fact that I woke up and made myself heard scared him off. But taking into consideration what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, that still unsets me. A couple of years ago, when I was around 29 years old, I embarked on a brief camping adventure out in the rural woodlands just beyond my hometown of Ashton Creek, Colorado. I wasn't an avid hiker or anything, just liked to spend some time outside every now and again, as long as the hike wasn't too difficult. For the most part, I stayed on easy trails, the kind that were maybe a mile or two in length, just enough to be a little off the grid without getting too far from my truck. This particular spot I was at was 1.5 miles from the trailhead, where my truck was. I'd found it a few weeks earlier, and loved how peaceful it was. The location was private, surrounded by pine trees, and there was a tiny, unspoiled lake not too far away from where I camped. I'd already been there for 2 nights, and was to spend another 2. On the 3rd morning, I trudged ahead and hiked back to my truck. I thought about retrieving my fishing rod and a few of the extra snacks that I had stored in the cooler. It was a still, cool morning. Birds were singing, and there was a soft breeze in the trees. It made the short trek feel even more peaceful. After collecting my equipment, I walked back to the campsite, thinking I'd try fishing one more time since I had some additional time to kill. But then I got to the lake, and something was off. There was this other tent set up at the water's edge, just a few yards away from mine. It wasn't there before. I didn't really worry about it initially. There were people coming and going through the woods constantly. But then I remembered something. I didn't see a single soul when I was hiking back to the trailhead. And because the trail I was following was the one and only that curled through to this side of the lake, that caused me to wonder, could it be there is a second trail and I don't even know about it? Maybe an unmarked one? Or maybe they'd been there first and I just not noticed. Either way, it was something I could do nothing about, so I shook the thought. I stood my rod up and cast out my line into the lake, letting the peace of the water calm my mind. At half-hour intervals or so, I'd glance over at the new tent, purely out of curiosity. But no matter how many times I went to look, I never saw anybody near it, not once. For 3 or so hours, I lingered there, trying this lure and that, and in this position and that, but I never bit anything. The quiet from the other tent started to be kind of suspicious, like whoever it was wasn't just off getting firewood or taking an afternoon hike. It just seemed like nobody was near at all. As soon as the sun began to set lower in the sky, I packed up my rod and returned to my camp. I cooked a plain meal, just something that I heated up over my small stove, and after eating, I went about collecting some sticks to build a small campfire. I thought that I would sit for a while and enjoy the sunset before getting into bed. As soon as the darkness was enough, I lit the fire. The golden light played over the camp, casting shadows on the trees. That was when I noticed something just ahead. Out of the reach of the light, a shadow flashed. It glimmered, only a momentary shape flashing between the trees. After that, I could see nothing at all. The woods were too dark, but I tried to keep calm. I figured it was the guy from the other tent, maybe going out getting sticks like I had gone to get some. It was an odd coincidence that they were coming when my fire was going on, but I didn't want to assume anything. I settled into my camping chair and tried to relax. The flames popped, the stars slowly appeared in the black sky, and the lake alongside me was peaceful. It was quiet, and in an odd way, peaceful. For a while, I even thought about sleeping there by the fire. But in a half hour, things were different. I looked up and was able to see several figures coming straight from the trees. Approaching, I could see there were 4 of them. 4 men, all headed straight for my campsite. My stomach dropped. My first reaction was to believe that they were most likely just some other group of campers, lost or in need of help. But as they stepped into the light, I got to see their faces. They were strict, tough. No smile, no warmth. They looked to be somewhere in their late 30s to early 40s. They all were dressed in dark clothes, and not a single sound was uttered as they approached. I stood up quickly, not wishing to show how nervous I was. I tried to talk, to ask them what they wanted, if they were okay, if they needed help, but none of them said anything. 2 of the men circled around behind me, straight towards my tent, while the other 2 advanced and pushed me aside. That was when I understood. These men had not blundered here by accident or become lost on the trail. They had come here on purpose, and I was the target. The 2 who were standing behind me started digging into my gear, unloading my pack, tossing gear all over the place. I watched in a state of frozen terror, unable to move, stuck on fear and confusion. The other 2 started pushing me back from the fire, inching me back into the woods. I kept talking, yelling anything I could think of to get them to stop, but their expressions never changed. Their eyes were hollow, cold, as if they didn't even see me as a human being, just an object in their way. We continued on deeper into the forest, the trees drawing closer together, the shadows darker with every step. Soon enough, the fire's light was out of sight, and all I could hear was our footsteps on the forest floor. I barely saw anything at all. Then we stopped. They turned to face me, and I turned to face them. We were surrounded by trees, covered in darkness, and the worst of all thoughts crossed my mind. One of the men stepped forward toward his belt for something. I didn't stick around to find out what. I ran. I did not will it, I just took off. My legs pumped wildly, my heart racing. I heard each twig snap underfoot, each branch smack against me as I pushed through the darkness. I had to rely on memory, trying to make an educated guess at where the trail was. I did not stop to listen if they were behind. I did not care. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the trail. My truck was nearby. I came to it, closed the door firmly, and turned the engine on as fast as I could. I did not see anyone following me. I did not look around. Then I went to the police and explained the whole thing. Nothing came of it, though. They stole all my gear. They didn't drop any evidence behind them at all. No footprints, no belongings, nothing to indicate who they were. I have no clue to this day what they were dragging me into the forest to do, but for real, I don't need somebody to tell me. It's more than horrifyingly obvious. And the only reason I'm still alive is because I ran when I did. That was the last time that I ever camped alone.